I've always had great doubts about myself, about my looks, about my talent or so-called talent. And so I've never believed much of it. I believed the results, and I'm very happy with them.
In 1978, a lost interview with Audrey Hepburn surfaced that shattered her perfect image. She finally confessed everything: her parents' Nazi connections, her secret work for the resistance at age 15, and the devastating truth about her romance with JFK. But the most shocking revelation? The real reason she walked away from Hollywood at the height of her fame. Today, we're exposing the dark past of cinema's most beloved star. Audrey Hepburn was born on May 4th, 1929, in Ixelles, Brussels, Belgium. Her full name was Audrey Kathleen Rustin. Her father was a banker with British and Austrian roots. Her mother came from a Dutch noble family. Surprisingly, both of Audrey's parents supported Nazi ideas in the 1930s. Her mother even met Adolf Hitler in 1935 and wrote articles praising him. This dark part of her family's past would bother Audrey for years. Later, her father added Hepburn to their last name, claiming they were related to Scottish nobility. This wasn't true, but it added a sense of mystery to Audrey's life. Audrey's early life wasn't easy. As a baby, she nearly died from whooping cough. Her heart stopped for a few minutes, but her mother refused to call a doctor. Instead, she revived Audrey by hitting her. This scary moment could have shaped the strength Audrey showed later in life. Audrey's family moved often, which made her childhood feel unsettled. By the time she was 5, she had lived in Brussels, London, and The Hague. While moving around gave her a worldly perspective, it also left her feeling out of place. But during this time, Audrey became fluent in many languages. This skill would later help her become a global film star. When Audrey was 6, her parents divorced. Her father left the family without explaining why. Audrey's mother told her that her father had gone on a trip and wouldn't come back. This left young Audrey confused and heartbroken. She wrote letters to her father every day, but they were never sent because no one knew where he was. Audrey later said this was the most painful experience of her life. She also remembered hearing her mother cry at night, which added to her sadness and fear of being abandoned. That same year, Audrey was sent to boarding school in England. She started taking ballet lessons there and fell in love with dance. It became her dream to be a ballerina. Her peaceful time in England didn't last long, though. In 1939, as World War II began, her mother moved the family back to the Netherlands, believing it would be safer there. Sadly, this decision brought them into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. Audrey Hepburn was just 11 years old when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands on May 10, 1940. Her life of comfort changed completely. Suddenly, everything was filled with fear and danger. In 1942, her uncle, Otto van Limburg-Styrum, was killed by the Nazis as punishment for a resistance act. This event changed Audrey's view of the world forever. Her family moved to Velp, but life there became harder every day. By January 1945, food shipments stopped, and the freezing winter made things worse. Audrey's family, once wealthy, had to stand in long lines for food. Often, there was nothing left to buy. Bombs fell at night, and during the day, they hid in cellars from fighter planes. Disease spread, and everyone in Velp, including Audrey, had to get painful shots to avoid typhus. The winter of 1944 to 1945, called the Hunger Winter, brought terrible suffering. Food became almost impossible to find. People in the Netherlands were eating as little as 400 calories a day. Audrey's family ran out of food and began eating tulip bulbs, which were hard to digest and had almost no nutrition. When even those ran out, They searched for weeds to eat. Audrey was just 15 years old and became very weak. She developed anemia and painful swelling from lack of food. She was so malnourished that she couldn't dance anymore, even though she loved it. With no heat in their house, Audrey and her family stayed in the cellar to keep warm. These months left her physically scarred and emotionally changed forever. Despite all this, Audrey found incredible courage. At 15, she joined the Dutch resistance. She worked with Dr. Hendrik, doing things that could have gotten her killed. She performed in secret ballet shows to raise money for people in hiding. These shows were so quiet that the audience couldn't even clap for fear of being caught. Audrey also delivered secret newspapers for the resistance. She hid the papers in her socks and cycled through the countryside, risking her life every time. One day, she had to deliver a message to a British pilot, hiding from the Nazis. On her way back, she met Nazi police. Thinking fast, she started picking flowers and gave them to the soldiers, smiling as they checked her papers. Her quick thinking saved her. The war left lasting effects on Audrey. The starvation during her teenage years affected her health forever. She stayed very thin her whole life, partly because of what she went through during the war. She also suffered from anemia, which made her tired and weak. Her stomach never fully recovered from eating things like tulip bulbs and grass. Some people think the malnutrition she experienced contributed to her later illness, but that isn't certain. What is clear is that these years shaped Audrey. In 1951, Audrey's life changed completely. While filming a small movie called Monte Carlo Baby in France, she was spotted by the famous writer Colette. Colette was looking for someone to play the role of Gigi in her Broadway play. When she saw Audrey, she instantly knew she had found the right person. Audrey was nervous about acting on stage because she had never done it before. She even told Colette she didn't think she could act. But Colette believed in her and convinced her to take the role. Audrey worked hard to prepare for Gigi. She learned her lines while sailing to New York and practiced constantly. At first, she struggled with projecting her voice, and rehearsals were stressful. But on opening night, Audrey charmed everyone. Critics called her enchanting and captivating. The play was a huge success, running for more than 200 performances. Audrey's name appeared in lights above the theater, an honor almost unheard of for a newcomer. Audrey Hepburn's rise to fame began with Roman Holiday in 1953, and her story feels like pure magic. The role of Princess Anne wasn't even meant for her. It was originally for Elizabeth Taylor. But everything changed when director William Wyler saw Audrey's screen test. On September 18, 1951, she went to Pinewood Studios for what she thought was a regular audition. Wyler, watching from far away in Hollywood, was amazed by her natural charm. Even after the test ended, he kept the cameras rolling and asked her about her life during World War II. Audrey's honesty and personality stood out so much that Wyler decided she was perfect for the role. Not everyone agreed with his choice. Paramount executives were worried about casting someone no one had heard of in such a big film, especially since it had a huge budget of $1.5 million. But Wyler believed in Audrey. He told them, "This girl is going to be a big star." He was right. When Roman Holiday premiered on August 27, 1953, it was a massive success, earning $12 million, a lot of money back then. Audrey's fresh, elegant style was a big contrast to Hollywood stars like Marilyn Monroe, who were famous for their curves and glamour. Audrey brought something new and unforgettable to the screen. Her performance as Princess Anne was so believable that Paramount had to make a deal with the British government. They didn't want people to think the character was based on Princess Margaret or the British royal family. The film also made history as the first American movie to be filmed entirely in Italy. Shooting in Rome made everything feel real, but it wasn't easy. They went over budget by $700,000, but the risk paid off. The success of Roman Holiday even started a trend of Hollywood films being made in Rome, which the press called Hollywood on the Tiber. Audrey's work on Roman Holiday earned her an Academy Award for Best Actress in 1954. She was only 24, making her one of the youngest to ever win that award. The ceremony, held on March 25, 1954, was unique because Audrey couldn't attend in Los Angeles. She was performing in a Broadway play, Undine, in New York. Dressed in a simple white Givenchy dress and still wearing stage makeup, she appeared via broadcast. When her name was announced, she was so surprised that she said later, "I didn't know what to do." She even kissed the presenter, Jean Hersholt, on the lips, a moment everyone still talks about. That night, something funny happened. Audrey almost lost her Oscar. She accidentally left it in the bathroom, but luckily, someone found it before she left. This little mishap became a sweet story people loved to share about her. Audrey's Oscar win wasn't just about her, it also showed how much Gregory Peck believed in her. Even though he was already a big star, Peck insisted that Audrey's name be listed with his above the title of the movie. He also predicted she would win the Oscar, and he was right. Just 3 days later, on March 28, 1954, Audrey won a Tony Award for Undine, making her one of the few people ever to win an Oscar and a Tony in the same week. Her next big movie, Sabrina, came out in 1954, just over a year after Roman Holiday. Directed by Billy Wilder, it showed a different side of Audrey. She played Sabrina, a chauffeur's daughter caught between two wealthy brothers, played by Humphrey Bogart and William Holden. The movie wasn't easy to make. Bogart, who was much older than Audrey, didn't treat her kindly and often complained about her acting. But Audrey's charm and talent shone through. Her performance was so good that she earned her second Oscar nomination. Sabrina also started something very important in Audrey's life: her partnership with French designer Hubert de Givenchy. For the film, Audrey insisted on wearing Givenchy's designs instead of the usual costumes provided by the studio. This caused some tension because Edith Head, the studio's costume designer, wanted all the credit. In the end, the movie won an Oscar for Best Costume Design, but many people knew that Givenchy was behind the most memorable looks. Audrey and Givenchy's friendship grew from there. He didn't just design for her movies. He also created clothes for her personal life. The famous little black dress she wore in Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961, was one of his creations. It became so famous that years later, it sold for $923,187 at an auction. Audrey called Givenchy her best friend and said his designs gave her confidence. He felt the same, saying she wasn't just a muse, but an inspiration for everything he did. The casting of Audrey Hepburn as Eliza Doolittle in the 1964 film adaptation of My Fair Lady remains one of Hollywood's most controversial decisions. In October 1963, Jack Warner, the powerful head of Warner Brothers Studios, made an announcement that left people stunned. Audrey Hepburn would play Eliza Doolittle in the film version of My Fair Lady. Now, this might not seem shocking at first glance, but here's why it was. Julie Andrews had already played this role on Broadway an astounding 2,717 times over 7 years, making the character essentially her own. Everyone simply assumed she would star in the movie version, especially since Rex Harrison, her Broadway co-star, was already set to reprise his role as Professor Henry Higgins. But Warner had different plans, and they were all about money. With the film's massive budget of $17 million, think about $150 million in today's money, he wanted a proven movie star. Hepburn, who was 34 at the time, had already won an Oscar for Roman Holiday and charmed audiences in hits like Sabrina and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Warner's reasoning was simple and brutally commercial. As he put it, even in the smallest towns across America and abroad, people knew who Audrey Hepburn was. The backlash was immediate and fierce, something unprecedented even by Hollywood's dramatic standards. Fans were so outraged that they took out an expensive full-page ad in Variety magazine condemning Warner's decision. Even the show's lyricist, Alan J. Lerner, couldn't contain his fury, privately writing to Andrews that the decision was an idiocy so colossal he couldn't bear to think about it. The pressure became so intense that Hepburn herself became incredibly nervous, even considering backing out of the role. But here's where the story takes an ironic twist. Julie Andrews, now free from My Fair Lady commitments, took on the title role in Disney's Mary Poppins. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Mary Poppins was a massive hit, and Andrews won the Academy Award for Best Actress. In a moment of delicious irony, while accepting her Oscar, she thanked Jack Warner, who made all this possible. The drama didn't end there. Hepburn, determined to prove her critics wrong, threw herself into preparing for the role, including months of intensive singing lessons. But unknown to her, the studio had already decided to dub her singing voice with Marni Nixon's. When Hepburn finally learned about this just 3 months before the film's premiere, she was devastated and reportedly cried in her dressing room. She had spent countless hours practicing, sometimes up to 12 hours a day, believing her own voice would be used. The final blow came during awards season. Despite My Fair Lady receiving 12 Oscar nominations and winning 8, including Best Picture, Hepburn wasn't even nominated for Best Actress. This was particularly painful as she had to present the Best Actor award to her co-star Rex Harrison at the ceremony. Adding to the sting, Julie Andrews had become a musical icon through Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, while Hepburn's musical abilities remained a subject of debate. This snub affected Hepburn deeply. Although she had won an Oscar for Roman Holiday in 1954, she would receive only one more nomination in her career, for Wait Until Dark in 1967. The controversy was so significant that the Los Angeles Times ran a front-page story titled The Audrey Hepburn Oscar Mystery, with one anonymous Academy member revealing the harsh truth. It's not that we don't think she did a good job, it's that we don't think she should have been doing the job at all. Meanwhile, Audrey Hepburn's life was full of love, heartbreak, and unforgettable experiences. In 1954, while working on the movie Sabrina, she was 24 years old and fell in love with her co-star William Holden, who was 35 and married with 2 children. They had incredible chemistry, both on and off the screen. Their romance stayed hidden, with secret meetings on the set and in Holden's dressing room. Holden, deeply in love with Audrey, told her he wanted to leave his wife, Ardis, and marry her. But everything changed when Audrey found out Holden had a vasectomy and couldn't have children. Audrey had always dreamed of becoming a mother, so this crushed her. On August 17, 1954, their relationship ended. It was painful for both of them. Years later, Holden called Audrey the love of my life. When they worked together again in 1964 on Paris When It Sizzles, his alcoholism had worsened, and he even ended up in the hospital during filming. Their past had left a lasting mark on them both. Audrey's romantic journey was also shaped by her engagement to James Hansen, a British businessman. They met in 1951 when Audrey was 22, and their relationship quickly led to a fairy tale engagement. She started planning a grand wedding in early 1952, even having a wedding dress made by the famous Fontana sisters in Rome. But as the wedding day came closer, Audrey realized their busy lives would keep them apart. She decided to call off the wedding just days before it was supposed to happen. She asked the Fontana sisters to give her dress to a poor bride who couldn't afford one. That bride, Amabile Altobella, wore the gown on her wedding day on September 25, 1952. Years later, Audrey admitted that, at the time, she was too young to fully understand what she wanted in a relationship. In 1954, Audrey married Mel Ferrer, an actor and filmmaker, after meeting him at a party hosted by Gregory Peck. They had a secret wedding in Switzerland, and Audrey wore a beautiful tea-length dress by Pierre Balmain. Many people in Hollywood were worried about their relationship. Mel was 12 years older, had been divorced twice, and seemed to have a strong influence on Audrey's choices. He convinced her to turn down roles in important movies, like The Diary of Anne Frank. While they made 9 films together during their marriage, some people believed his control limited her career. Despite the challenges, Audrey stayed loyal to him and even defended their relationship in interviews. Their marriage lasted 14 years, but by 1968, the strain was too much, and they divorced. Audrey later said Mel gave her confidence as an actress, even though their relationship had its difficulties. Audrey's dream of becoming a mother was tested by many heartbreaking losses. She had several miscarriages between 1955 and 1967. Her first miscarriage happened while filming War and Peace. Another loss came in 1959 during the production of The Unforgiven. In 1965, Audrey went through her most devastating experience when she had a stillbirth in the 7th month of her pregnancy. She fell into a deep depression and took time away from the public to heal. But Audrey never gave up on her dream. In 1960, she gave birth to her first son, Sean. Later, in 1970, she had her second son, Luca, after marrying Andrea Dotti. These experiences shaped Audrey's life and inspired her later work with UNICEF, where she became a passionate advocate for mothers and children. Audrey also had a brief romance with John F. Kennedy in 1954, when she was 25 and he was a young senator. They met at a party hosted by Gregory Peck, and their connection was immediate. They met secretly for a short time, but both knew it couldn't last. Kennedy was married, and Audrey's career was taking off. Their last meeting was at a beach house in Malibu, where they decided to end things. When Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Audrey was heartbroken and canceled her plans for a week to mourn. Years later, she described her time with Kennedy as something that stayed with her forever. In 1967, Audrey Hepburn made a choice that shocked everyone. She was at the top of her career, loved by millions, and had starred in famous movies like Roman Holiday, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and My Fair Lady. She had won an Oscar and other big awards, but she gave it all up. At 38 years old, she decided to leave Hollywood and focus on her family. Audrey had faced heartbreak with several miscarriages, and she realized she couldn't balance her career and her dream of being a mother. So, she chose family over fame. Audrey moved far away from the Hollywood spotlight. She bought a peaceful villa in Switzerland and focused on raising her son, Sean, who was born in 1960. This was personal for her. Growing up, Audrey had a rough childhood. Her father left the family, and she lived through the horrors of World War II. She wanted to give Sean the love and stability she never had. Around the same time, movies in Hollywood were changing. Gritty, realistic films were taking over, and Audrey's elegant style didn't fit this new trend. Leaving the spotlight at this moment actually helped her remain a timeless symbol of old Hollywood glamour. A couple of years later, in 1969, Audrey fell in love again. She married Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist, after meeting him on a Mediterranean cruise. He was 9 years younger than her, but Audrey believed he could give her the stable family life she wanted. They had a small wedding in Switzerland, away from all the Hollywood buzz. A year later, in 1970, Audrey had her second son, Luca, when she was 40. She felt her sacrifices had paid off. Family was her top priority, and now she had the family she had dreamed of. But not everything was perfect. Andrea's work kept him away a lot, and their lives were very different. Audrey, who had once been the darling of Hollywood, adjusted to a quieter life in Rome. But Andrea expected her to be a traditional Italian wife, which created tension. And then came something that hurt her deeply: Andrea's infidelity. He had countless affairs during their marriage. Paparazzi even photographed him with many women while Audrey was away. One time, Audrey's maid revealed that Andrea had been seeing other women in their own home while she was traveling. This broke her heart. She told her eldest son, Sean, about Andrea's betrayal, crying as she spoke. Audrey had also faced infidelity in her first marriage to Mel Ferrer. They had married in 1954, but rumors of affairs followed them for years. Mel was controlling, and both of them were unfaithful. Audrey was linked to her co-star Peter Finch, while Mel had his own dalliances. These problems eventually led to their divorce in 1968. In the late 1970s and 1980s, Audrey tried to return to acting, but things were different. Hollywood had changed, and audiences wanted new kinds of stories. In 1976, she starred in Robin and Marion with Sean Connery, playing an older Maid Marian. Critics liked it, but it didn't do well at the box office. In 1979, she acted in Bloodline, a thriller with dark themes, far from the light elegance she was known for. During filming, she confided in her co-star, Ben Gazzara, about her marriage troubles, and they had a brief affair. By the time she acted in They All Laughed in 1987, the film went mostly unnoticed. Audrey realized that her time in Hollywood was truly over. Her last film role was in Steven Spielberg's Always in 1989. She played an angel in a short but meaningful scene, which Spielberg wrote just for her. It was a gentle and graceful farewell to the world of movies. After that, Audrey left acting completely and turned her energy toward humanitarian work, devoting her life to helping others. In 1988, she became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. She visited more than 50 countries in just 5 years. Her first trip was to Ethiopia, where drought and war had left children starving. She worked non-stop, giving interviews every day to make people care about these children. In 1989, she went to Sudan during a civil war, visiting camps where people had fled for safety. Audrey traveled to many places, including Kenya, Guatemala, Vietnam, and Somalia. Wherever she went, she tried to help children who were suffering. Even when she was sick with cancer in 1992, she insisted on visiting Somalia. She went to dangerous areas during the war and thanked soldiers who were helping. Her courage and kindness inspired everyone who met her. Audrey didn't use her fame to promote herself. Instead, she used it to show the world what children needed. After her trip to Ethiopia, she said, "I'm not interested in promoting Audrey Hepburn these days. I'm interested in telling the world how they can help Ethiopia." She gave speeches, talked to governments, and worked with the media to spread UNICEF's message. She even walked with children in Vietnam to raise awareness about their struggles. In Bangladesh, she was photographed giving polio vaccines, which encouraged many people to support vaccination efforts. Her actions showed that fame could be used for something good, and her hard work made a real difference for children. Audrey's connection to UNICEF came from her own childhood. She grew up during World War II and lived through the German occupation of the Netherlands. During the hunger winter of 1944, she and her family ate tulip bulbs and grass to survive. After the war, she received food and medical help from UNICEF's predecessor. She always said that aid saved her life. This made her want to help others in the same way. When she visited children during her missions, she would tell them, "I know what it feels like." This made her work with UNICEF deeply personal and meaningful. In her final years, Audrey's focus on UNICEF became even stronger. In 1992, she found out she had cancer. Even though she was very sick, she still went on one last mission to Somalia. Somalia was in the middle of a war, and many children were starving. Audrey refused to cancel the trip, even though it was dangerous. She thanked the soldiers who were helping, saying their compassion gave her hope. After returning home, she kept working for UNICEF, giving speeches and raising money. In December 1992, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her work. Audrey passed away in January 1993, but her message stayed clear. She said, "Those who have must give to those who have nothing." Her life was a beautiful example of kindness, courage, and love.